The healing is hard work because, and that's why not many people do it. It's hard, Linda. It's hard to take 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. You think you're okay one day, and then you're being triggered by something, the next day. So my background is I'm an adult social worker. I have worked for the local authority and the NHS for over 16 years. And I specifically work within the sector of mental health, adult mental health. And I also qualified as a coach about 7 years ago because I found that coaching was a more empowering way to work with people. And I was coached myself. So I fused all of that and put it into the book because I was noticing common themes with our women, particularly. And those were themes along the lines of feeling not good enough, feeling as if they weren't deserving, and feeling like they had to work in order to get what they needed. So I addressed those issues in the book, and that is what inspired me. Many of us are on autopilot, and we are hidden in plain sight because no one really sees the suffering. I believe many of us are carrying hidden burdens, and it can feel like you're drowning sometimes and you just want someone to rescue you at times. So, for example, I guess if you've lived in survival mode for a long time, you do the ordinary things that are expected of you. So, for example, in my case, I was being a mother. I had a good job, had relationships. I was taking care of all my responsibilities, but there was a pervasive sadness, a melancholy, I would say, that was there. And no one would know it because they say, Maz, you seem so upbeat. You're the life and soul of the party. But when you have to function like that for many years, it can be quite difficult. And I'm sure, and I've seen this in my work and with the ladies I coach, and even on the acute mental health wards, they're all, it manifests in different ways, but it's the same kind of thing behind it, that they are just living, they're going through the motions of life and not really living intentionally and on purpose. You see, it comes and it goes, but when I initially realized it, I was sitting at work and, we have targets and deadlines and all of that. And the job was good, it was paying well, but I just felt a sense of, what am I doing here? I'm not supposed to be here. I felt on the inside that there was more to me than this. Yes, I can do the job, I'm qualified to do the job, but I'm meant to do more. I'm meant to impact more people in a different way. And they didn't value me. And I thought, gosh, I can't stand the thought of being here another 10, 20 years. And even in the relationships, the man that I was with at the time, he was a very nice man, very good, very wealthy. But it wasn't what I needed, and it was like a yearning within me. So I realized that, and I changed. I think sometimes we have to get to the point where we've had enough. You have to have, and at that point I'd had enough, so I left that job. It helped for me to have coaching, as I said at the time, which changed my perspective, and I was able to make better choices for myself. It's that 80-20 principle, because we can have strategies and I could tell you, Linda, do this, do that. But you see, if your mind doesn't believe it, it's not going to do it. You're going to sabotage any progress. So with those women that I've worked with, whether it's been that they've left a relationship, a job, and it doesn't always mean leaving things, there's a realization that they come to. But again, they've had to have had enough of what they've been enduring. And until that point, that's the catalyst for change. So, for example, a woman that I work with in an abusive relationship, she'd been in it for years, but it was only when her own children had been threatened by her partner did she decide, she was like, you can do what you want to me, but my kids, you don't touch my kids. And that was the catalyst for her. So we helped her to get to safety and realize, just reevaluate what's important. How do I want to spend the rest of my life? and it wasn't with him. Being strong means different things to different people. But the way that we have used it more recently in the diaspora might not be helpful. So, for example, the strong black woman, the stereotype, I should say, of the strong black woman often refers to a woman who she doesn't take any nonsense. She is very hyper independent. She can be judgmental. She doesn't tend to feel her emotions. She's strong and she takes care of others, often at the expense of her own needs. And she's just hard, she's hard. And I do appreciate where that comes from, because I was raised like that myself. It's all the socio-economic, patriarchal pressures that have been placed upon us as black women. And it's that colonial legacy. We've had to be, that's how we've survived, right? So that's good, but what worked then might not be suitable for now. So, in terms of, I've heard women say, I'm an alpha female. You're weak if you don't present like me because I'm strong. And that's not helpful, because we all have different experiences and process trauma differently. So I think it's not helpful. You can be strong, you can be resilient, yes, of course. But actually, I would say being strong involves asking for help and involves being vulnerable and getting the healing that you need. So we need to perhaps have redefine what that looks like. And I'm just saying that stereotype is outdated, because it forces you to have to suffer in silence. It discourages you from asking for help, and causes you as well sometimes to inflict unnecessary pain on others. So that is why it's not really helpful.
Tell me a personal story about how you realized that you are living the stereotype of the strong black woman, and how you dismantled that within yourself.
In fact, we all know in the diaspora what that's like to... There are certain ideals that we subscribe to. Of course, I was told you have to work twice as hard than your white counterparts. If you want to get anywhere, you have to just go over and above. And I realized that there's some partial truth in that. Of course, there is. And it was shown to me just growing up and seeing that reflected, that things like crying was a sign of weakness. And you had to be strong. Even when you were getting physically reprimanded, you have to, don't cry. Why are you crying? Stop crying, shut up. That kind of thing. And not to show any weakness, not to talk about even the way we're talking now, Linda, that would be frowned upon in my community. So it's, what I'm saying to you fundamentally is I've had to renounce that. Ideals from, our cultural norms, because it didn't serve me anymore. For me to be silent, I'm not going to suffer in silence because you don't like my suffering. It makes you feel uncomfortable. I'm sorry, that's your problem. But for me, I'm going to talk about it. And that's how I've found my own healing and dismantled those. So I don't subscribe to those. I say, yeah, I can be strong in many ways, and that looks different, but I'm actually very weak sometimes. I'm very vulnerable. I don't feel safe sometimes, and I need help at times. And if that makes me weak, then okay, then I cannot be strong all the time and live up to your expectations. Toxic positivity is all around us. And of course, positivity is a great thing, but anything in excess is not helpful. So what that looks like is when perhaps you've disclosed something to a friend and they say, oh, Linda, get over it. Why are you sad about that, Linda? But you felt it, your emotions, you're feeling it. They've dismissed your feelings, or what I see commonly at funerals, for example. Don't cry. Don't cry. That person is in a better place. Now, that might be true, and the person is trying to comfort you, but why should you not cry? Why not? And, we see this in relationships. Oh, it could be worse. I know he's cheating, but you could do worse. He's got money, he's rich, stay with him. So why it's dangerous, Linda, is because it encourages people to endure abusive environments. and relationships, at the very least, it dismisses that person's experience. So what do people do when they feel that they cannot speak? They suppress those feelings and they have to lie. They can't live authentically. And that's hard work. That is the opposite of the healing that we are trying to empower people to have. It was just how we grew up. And that's what it was like in the 80s and 90s. It was, I lived over in Jamaica for a while with my grandmother. So I could be disciplined and get better grades at school. And that was an environment where children were seen and not heard. You had to be quiet. There was no expression. There was no free thinking. There was nothing. All of that was discouraged. I remember it was highly religious. We had to go to church and all of that was fine. But, I've always been an inquisitive person, weren't allowed to ask questions. So again, that meant that I had to suppress, didn't have a voice. I was actually quite a timid child, if you can believe. But as I grew older, I must have become more rebellious because I was out and I'm like, I'm here. And that formed my love of performance arts and all sorts of creative arts because it gave me a way to express myself. So I think those upbringings that we had, we can learn from them. We can reflect that that's what we did at the time, but we want to do better. When we know better, we do better. So I know for example, I don't raise my daughter the way that I was raised. So it's just being mindful of some of the harmful, even though they were coming from a place of my best interests or good intentions, but they didn't serve me very well into adulthood. You understand?
What are the main things you do different with your daughter opposing to how you were raised?
Well, yeah, we talk. We're allowed to talk. Funnily enough, my daughter's the opposite from me, so she's not much of a talker. She doesn't want to necessarily talk about feelings and all of that, but I encourage it, and I let her see mine. I'm vulnerable with her. She's seen me angry, she's seen me sad. She's known when I'm disappointed, and I share that with her. If we see something on the news or something, I'm like, oh, that's awful. What do you think about what happened with this and that? So the expression is encouraged in my household, and anyone, if you're a friend of mine, then you have full permission to show up just as you are. And so that's the main difference. And I actually talk about those generational things with her. I said, with grandma and your great grandma, they believe this, and what do you believe? And, all of that. We have, basically, it's open conversations. The way we discipline is a bit different now, I joke with some of my colleagues, adult social workers, because we get a lot of safeguarding in. And I joke, I say some of the things that our parents did to us would be considered safeguarding now that our parents would be arrested. So, all the beatings and the verbal, what is considered verbal abuse now, those kind of things. So we know the effect it had on us. It wasn't very nice. So we try to talk more lovingly to our children or to others, because, that kind of thing. It's just being mindful and having empathy for that small girl that you were, how it made you feel, and not wanting anyone else to have to go through that. I guess we all have metaphorical masks, and there is a place for that. We need them for social cohesion. It's how we function, isn't it? But I'm saying that prolonged wearing of the masks can be detrimental to the soul. So, for example, Linda, I guess the Linda that turns up for work is different from Linda when she's at home, with family, with friends, with the boyfriend or whoever. We show different parts of ourselves to different audiences, I guess. And we do that because we need to function. We need to assess, is this safe? If I show up as I am, will you accept me? I don't know. For example, we code switch. You and I, from the diaspora, at work, I'm not going to work speaking patois. I I have my telephone voice, my posh voice, and that's how I present when I'm dealing professionally with clients and what have you. Why do I do that? Perhaps because it's the other part of me is not welcomed in that space. So ultimately what I'm saying is that when we feel seen and heard, we can show up authentically. If we suspect that it's dangerous and that your voice and the value is not going to be appreciated, we tend to shrink or we morph into something else. So we all, therefore, we walk around with these masks because it serves a purpose. Otherwise, we'd all just be unapologetically free to be, wouldn't we? But what I've seen, and that's why I do the work that I do, is that because of some traumatic experiences, i.e., it could be any kind of, it could be divorce, it could be even me in my sort of depression. It's not something that was welcome to talk about. So what I see us do, and I recognize this in my clients, is that it's the shame, it's the stigma that keeps us from talking about it, because we perhaps, as I mentioned about my upbringing, don't want to be seen as weak, as incompetent, as if you failed in some way because you are struggling to cope with the pressures of life. But it's dangerous to suffer in silence because it causes all matter of physical, mental and spiritual problems. So it may be that, for example, Linda, you keep having a headache, you don't know why. Keep saying, we don't express it in, we don't say things like, I am depressed, or I'm feeling really just disappointed and deflated. And, we don't tend to speak like that. We might, however, say, well, I'm just tired. I just need a little rum. I just need sex. That's how it's expressed. But that might look like you being up all night because you've got insomnia, you've got hypertension, you've got diabetes, you have depression, you have all manner of other mental health disorders, or you have a faith, but you're losing your faith. You do a lot of spiritual bypassing. I see that a lot in the church. So do you see what I mean? It looks different for different people. It manifests itself differently, but at the core is the fact that you're suffering in silence. And it goes back to the themes that I mentioned before about this pervasive feeling that many women have about not being enough, not feeling good enough, and not feeling as if they're deserving of the good things in life. Elena MacArthur's poem, and I took an excerpt from that, put in my book. It's taken from a collection of poems, I believe. It's called Being a Black Woman Can Get You Killed. And I love it. It captures all the sentiments of the book, really, because what she's saying is that we've been told lies as women. We've been told lies. We believe those lies from our ancestors. And we've had to stifle our dreams, our hopes. And what that can look like is we tolerate certain abuses. It has led to us being beaten and downgraded and oppressed. And it manifests, she says in the poem, as tumors in her womb, tumors in the breast, and various things, because this woman has had to be strong all her life. She's put up with all kinds of oppression, and that is the result. I think that's what she's saying. The tumors are the result of carrying those burdens, those hardships of life, and not having anybody to tell, and not being allowed permission to grieve who she was and who she is. So that speaks to that. That's, in fact, she presents it so eloquently. I'd encourage your audience to read that, because it's the reason why it's dangerous. And it might not be tumors. It might, like I said, for one, it might look like depression. For another, it just might be the dysfunctional relationships that we keep, all the patterns and the generational trauma that we pass on. That's why it's dangerous. And at the very, for those who may be suicidal, so we're talking about a real risk to our health, our mind, our body, our soul. So it's not helpful.
And how do you coach to break out of that?
Again, with acknowledging, with any issue, you have to first acknowledge. You cannot heal from something if you're in denial. And this is, going back to your other thing, is I hear so many people, Linda, for example, they say, yeah, especially men, but more so the women in the diaspora, that, you know, they'll say, well, yeah, I went through all of that. Yeah, I used to get beaten. I used to have this, but I'm okay now. Look, I'm strong. I'm fine. And I think to myself, because I know some of these people personally, they're in my family, or they were the former me. And I'm thinking, no, you're not. You're not okay. You are an alcoholic. You're promiscuous. You're a perfectionist, and you overwork to try and give yourself that sense of worth. But your identity is not in that relationship, in that job. And so it's not helpful to that's just not helpful, because that's the first line of defense. People say, oh, I'm okay. And it's like, you're not okay. So if you acknowledge that you're not okay, what must you do? And I would encourage everyone, research. What is it that you're feeling? Acknowledge, and then you can accept, and then you can seek the help that you need. And I'm not saying everybody needs to go to counseling or have coaching. That help may come from other forms. Connect with your creator. What is it that you do that works for you? You know yourself. So first, just please, let's start having the conversation that we're not okay. As I say, it's okay not to be okay. A lot of us, especially as Black women, we carry these burdens, and it becomes familiar. It's all we know, and we normalize these things. But I think if we all spoke about these things, we have a shared kind of experience. And what I mean is, when we can be in a dysfunctional place, in a place of survival, in a place where it's been really miserable. Take, for example, the unhealthy relationships. I've been in a few myself, and you know that man's no good for you, but because maybe you've invested a certain amount of time, you think, well, I'm not going back now. I've put in too much, therefore I'm just gonna endure it. And he's not too bad anyway. Yeah, he might be a cheater, he might be, but he's okay. And we stay, and it's not what we want for ourselves. It's a form of self-sabotage. And even, like you mentioned, with depression, with these kind of things, we are familiar. So sometimes when we start to come out of that, and I know that was the case for me, when things start to go well, you get a bit nervous. You think, something bad's going to happen. I don't deserve this. Something's going to go wrong. This is too good to be true. And then we sabotage. So that might look like quitting a job that was really good for you. It was meant for you, or just not living below your potential, basically. And that's what many of us do. We convince ourselves that I'm all right here. Here is okay. Yeah, this house is falling apart. Yeah, this is what I'm used to. I want to travel, but my family never travel. You know, I've even been told things like Black people don't go to certain places. We don't do that. We don't go to the theatre. Can you believe that, Linda? We don't go to the theatre. So all of these things keep us in a prison, and we want to break out, and sometimes the key's right there, but we refuse to pick up the key and let ourselves out, because this is all I've known, and it's rooted in a place of fear of the unknown. Because if I go for that job, or if I do the things that I really want to do and live up to my potential, then what does that look like? Will people like me? Will they accept me? Will they love me? Who will I become? Oh, that's too much to think about, so let me just stay here. So it becomes a comfort, like a comfort blanket. And it's dirty, like with our kids. They're like, no, it's mine. And you have to take that thing and clean it up, because it can be harmful eventually. The legacy that we leave other people, how we break generational traumas and patterns, because there are certain things within all of our bloodlines that are questionable, that things that we wouldn't want to give to our children. So, for example, we see certain patterns. I know in my own family there is, for example, the women don't tend to stay married for very long. They tend to be very independent, angry women. And I know that's not something I would want for my daughter. We're in a different age now, and I would want her to have all the things that I don't have. But for some, there is a legacy. We see repeated patterns of abuse, sexual abuse, for example, increased vulnerability and susceptibility to things like alcoholism. Whatever that looks like, there are certain things that you did, that your mum did, that your grandma did, and all of these things. And it's recognizing that, because if we, I think in the TED talk that Tabitha does, she talks about, for her family, it was this thing around arranged marriage, and they all had to be married off young. And her mother decided to break away from that. So it's recognizing that this tradition that we have is killing us. It is not helpful. We need to intercept. We need to get to the root of the issue in order to stop it. Because if we continue like we do in the diaspora, like I said, gave the example before of many people who say, well, I used to get hit, I got beatings, so that's what I'm going to do with mine. No, it's doing better than, you know better, so you do better. And it's not perpetuating the same harm that you were inflicted, and doing that to others. Even if you don't have children, it's like, what do you want your legacy to be? What do you want people to say about you? We don't have to wait till your funeral to review your whole life. You can start right where you are and make it better for someone else. Because I believe, we know right from wrong. We know what may have worked back then does not serve us. I know, for example, my grandmother was a very strict woman. Even things like menstrual cycles didn't talk to my mother about. In fact, she used to hit her, when she went through puberty, and start developing breasts, and my grandmother's response was, "Oh, you think you're a woman? You think you're a woman now? You're going to start having men?" And then it was like, "You're a whore," that kind of thing. So that was quite damaging for my mother throughout her childhood, and that kind of thing. So it's just understanding, where does that come from? I know you've had those traumas, but don't give them to me. This is why we need to get the help. This is why we can't afford in the community, as I keep hearing, oh, well, Black people don't have therapy. We don't do that. We're stronger than that. Do you see the connection there that keeps people in these false narratives that they have that are so damaging, because they think they're not hurting anybody, and they are. They're hurting, and it influences the whole everyone who's connected to them. So yeah, that's how we transform the trauma, by acknowledging it, by seeking the help. And as I mentioned earlier, that might look like therapy, coaching, connecting with your creator, whatever your religion is, researching, doing your own personal growth journey. But you have to at least be curious enough to start it. It doesn't work when you just push it under the carpet and say, "Oh, no, I'm fine. I'm strong. I'm wrong and strong." Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks different for everyone, but for me, it's replenishing that, because I give out a lot. It can be emotionally draining, so I have to fill my cup. And what that looks like these days is my faith. It means being still and silent and allowing for that connection with my creator. It looks like, sometimes, having counseling, having coaching, speaking to people who have been where I've been, who are able to help me navigate the hardships of life. And it looks like just taking time for myself and feeling those emotions, even the ones that we don't like, those, the disappointment, the regrets, the sadness, as well as celebrating my achievements, the joy and the elation that can come with life as well. So I do a lot of solo traveling. Since the whole lockdown and pandemic thing, I have taken to doing whatever it is on my bucket list, and one of those things was traveling. So I've been to over 10 destinations in the last year alone by myself. I quite enjoy it because it forces me out of my comfort zone. I meet people I wouldn't associate with, and I find myself quite entertaining, actually. I'm always intrigued at how I adapt to those people. So wherever I go, for example, I was in Albania, and a grandma just came to talk. I didn't speak the language, but wherever I go, I seem to attract these people who'll tell me their life story. They gravitate to me. I'll talk to them. And I quite like how versatile I am. And I find out more about myself. And it just gives me a greater sense of purpose. So that's one of the many things I do. And I would encourage others to find out what that looks like for them. I read a lot, podcasts, books. I never used to do these things, Linda. This is what I mean about going through the motions of life. Content to just sit, watch Netflix. You come home, you get your money. You don't want to be bothered with anything else, but it seems like it's extra work, but it's not. But if you are curious and you think, okay, what is something I can do to develop myself further? So these are the things. I have goals, basically. It's the coach in me. So before I started intentionally writing down my goals, I used to just coast. If you're driving, you put in the sat nav, but if you don't know where you're going, how can you know what you're aiming for? So that's what I do, and that helps. And it's a journey, Linda, because whatever worked for me 10 years ago might not work now. Depends what season I'm in. We've talked about depression. If I'm in a depressive phase that is particularly, which I know we're going to talk about, that was happening in the dark soul of the night, in those really intense moments, then some of those things won't work for me in that moment. But I'm in a good space, and these things are currently what I do. Yeah, I grew up in a middle-class Christian home. There was nothing wrong with that. However, there wasn't so much a male, the absent father, basically, having to be sent away to Jamaica. And
how old were you?
I was young. I was about 8 or 9. And that, I suppose at the time my mother wanted me to have, for educational purposes, because the education system she thought was better. She didn't feel, I think at the time they thought I may have been dyslexic, and she thought that I'd get a better education out there. She was working long hours, and I think she didn't really have anyone to look after me. So I was sent off. But it kind of felt like a punishment. And even to this day, we don't really talk about it. And my mother's response is always, I did my best for you. Don't be ungrateful. And I was like, I know, Mum, but I just want to know what was going on then and what was going on for you. It must have been difficult to send your child away. I personally couldn't send my child off, although, when she's doing my head in, I might feel like it. But the point is that was a difficult time. And I think those mother wounds that had developed made me feel like an orphan, made me feel like, even to this day. So I have family in name. This is why I'm not a big advocate of family. People say, that's your mother, that's your father, that's your pastor, show respect. I don't really subscribe to those ideals, because a lot of atrocities happen in the name of family, or this person has this title. I don't do that. How I started to heal, and it was only as I grew up, I had to learn more about myself and understand that because some of the family members that I have are very much the same. I've had to distance myself from some of them for my own healing, because they are not helpful, and some of them are still quite abusive, if I'm honest. And it came from my own self-acceptance to begin with, and understand that what happened wasn't right. It came from, like I said, these rejection and mother wounds. Again, therapy, doing all that inner child work, and going over and over that, sitting with those uncomfortable emotions. and lots of crying and anger and stress and just feeling all of that, which happened over a period of years. Even educating myself about what narcissism was in the clinical sense, because some family members do have that narcissistic personality disorder, because I say that, I make that distinction because a lot of people say, oh, he's a narcissist and what have you, and without fully knowing what that entails. So I had to accept that not everybody has the capacity to love. That's one of the biggest lessons that I've had to learn in all relationships, whether you're with a man or whether it's your own family, that they don't all have the capacity to love and appreciate. And once you understand that, you will stop trying to people please. You'll stop trying to gain their approval. You'll stop, sorry, it's a bit nosy, isn't it? You'll stop doing all those things where you're trying to perform and seek validation, because it's like Mark Twain says, a man cannot live without his own approval. That's what matters, because it doesn't matter how many people tell you, Linda, you're gorgeous, which I've told you many times today. You're gorgeous, you should be doing this. If you feel terrible about yourself, then what good are my words, So it's for us, you see what I mean? It's for us. We can't influence others and change their behavior, but we can change ourselves. And that's the work. And luckily, I'm naturally very philosophical. I've always asked, why is it like this? Why do we follow those traditions? And I just sought to do something about it, because I thought, I'm not gonna, again, I had to have had enough. I had enough. I was tired of feeling, I was just tired. And I didn't want to be in that dark place anymore. So that's what moved me. You call up, it's daunting, trying to find a therapist, I work in mental health, by the way, as well, so I see both sides of the extreme. And then when I'm hearing people going through all of the things that I've been through, and I just am here to tell them it doesn't have to be that way. There is another way. You are not doomed to suffer the same fate as mum, as grandma, as whoever. You can take charge. So that's where I'm coming from anyway. I certainly did feel rejected, abandoned, because I was. It's actually a fact. It's not a feeling. And it affected me today. It affected my relationships. Initially, what that looked like was the very things that you've mentioned and that we've discussed thus far, in terms of I went to university, I got 2 degrees. I constantly striving to look good on paper. And on paper I do look good. But like I said, that pervasive sadness that was always with me came from those wounds. Because if your own mother rejects you and your father hasn't even stuck around, so that means, in your head you internalize that I'm not good enough. I wasn't even worthy of love. And it can cause you to be constantly in performance mode, So I thought, I wanted to go to university anyway, but I thought, oh, now she'll love me. Now she's, it didn't make a bit of difference. I did all these things. I've achieved great things in my life, and great financial status at one point. I had a lot of, my finances were great and everything looked good, but it wasn't enough for them. At some stage it wasn't enough for me, and it led to relationships with all kinds of criminals, men who were criminals, because I wanted to rehabilitate them, thought I could help them, and dysfunctional friendships, even with some female relationships, friends that perhaps didn't have my best interests at heart. Friends that look like my mother, because they say that, right? You'll probably end up marrying a man that's like your father. If you're used to your father was an alcoholic, you'll go and marry one, or if you don't become one, or these kind of things, because you see that the cycle repeats. So that is why it is important to acknowledge that something is wrong here, and I think we all know what that is in our own lives. That niggling feeling, that thing that tells you what if. So I knew I had mother wounds. I knew I had all of this. And it was overwhelming, so I had to go and seek help, which is what I do. And it's a journey, by the way, Linda. It doesn't stop. So there are times that I'm in better places than others, but I have to remember again my identity, who I am. And that is where the spiritual part comes in. Because we're human beings having this experience, but I do believe we're spiritual beings having a human experience. So whatever is happening to my body and my physicality is not all there is. There is some things. So whatever is in my subconscious is going to come out. So I work to address those things that I don't know about. We all have them. There are things we don't know about. We have to, and they come out, they come out in different ways. So we need to bring them out in order, it's just like a cut, whatever. If you don't bring it, if you try and cover it and hide it and whatever, it can fester, get infected. So we want to bring it out and get that healing. Yes, you understand. The average person has, they might between 60 and 70,000 thoughts a day. If you're someone like me, an overthinker, it's probably a lot more. But the point is, if you imagine the majority of those thoughts, at least 80% are negative. So that therefore we have to do the work to overcome that. It's naturally negative. We're constantly judging and assessing everything around us. And I call them the gremlins. So I don't know. And us women are prone to things like imposter syndrome and all of those things. But it's, again, comes back. It's rooted in fear. It's rooted in that thing that says to you, whenever you try and elevate or go to the next level, it's like, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are, Linda? Do you think you're nice? You think you can go for that? You think you can have that kind of salary? You think you can marry that man? They always appear. Have you noticed? They always appear whenever you are trying to improve, because they exist to keep you in that comfortable place. And that's what we were talking about before, with that misery that becomes so familiar that we cannot leave it. So what I'm saying is we have to do the work to capture those thoughts. And I think in neuroscience, they tell us it's within the first 30 seconds. Because if you dwell and you ruminate on the thoughts, it becomes all encompassing and it's harder to get out of. So we have to kind of program our minds to say, acknowledge, be curious, where did that come from? Why am I thinking this? So what I'm saying is I've had to unlearn, and I encourage us all. I guess the message is, if your religion, your traditions and your culture are oppressing you, then you might want to put some distance between them. And that's hard for people to do. It's hard for people, Linda, to acknowledge their whole lives may have been based on a lie. So that is why they cling to what they know. But if it's oppressing you, and I've seen too many women who are stuck because of, this is what we do in our culture. This is what my tradition. But I'm like, but what are you saying? Not what do you say, and how is this affecting you? And if you find yourself, if you're on the psychiatric ward, then it might be time to let some of those things go. Your healing might look offensive to them because take my case, whenever I've tried to broach certain subjects of things I knew weren't right, I get told, so you're saying we didn't do enough for you? You're so ungrateful. You what are you trying to say? Or you're too English because this is what we had to go through. So why not you? I had to suffer. Even my own mother has told me this. I had to suffer. When I came in, she came in the Windrush. And I had to suffer. So you should suffer too. And I said, why would you want me to suffer? Surely you would want more. But whenever you try and elevate and progress, as I said, it can be offensive to them. And so they will try and sabotage what you're doing. But you need to keep going for your own sake. And for the very reason that we talked about before, because you're breaking generational patterns and traumas. And you do not want to hand the same legacy that you've been given onto your children or to your relationships and those who are in your sphere. So therefore, what you need to do is continue with that work. And the healing is hard work and that's why not many people do it. It's hard, Linda. It's hard to take 2 steps forward, 5 steps back. You think you're okay one day and then you're being triggered by something, the next day. But those people, I would say I've had to, in some cases, literally go no contact. And what that means is, never mind Christmas and all these times, I don't spend it. I refuse to spend birthdays, holidays with people who are intent on bringing me down. And that looks different for each person. But if some of you know what I'm talking about, because there's that uncle, that person you get around, and every time they're just degrading you, every time. But what we need to do is have healthy boundaries, because it tells people how to treat us, tells them what we'll tolerate. And once we have those, then we can enjoy relationships and we can feel better about ourselves. We won't resent ourselves for putting up with these kind of things. I can break free. I can still appreciate my cultural heritage and all that my ancestors have given me, but I can do it differently too. Is that okay? Will you love me if I show up authentically? And if the answer is no, then sometimes we need to find a new tribe. Because there are people just like you and me out there, Linda. There are people. There's so many of them, but because they're silent, we won't know. I'm convinced. Everybody looks like they've got it together. We are all suffering in some way or another. We just might not be vocal about it. That's all. Please do not suffer in silence. We are in an information age. You can talk to me. You can connect with me, and it is about. And that's why I wrote the book. It is about embracing that whole kintsugi principle. I don't know, Linda. Are you familiar with kintsugi?
No, I think we did explain it in the book.
Yes. You got to read it again. Kintsugi is the Japanese art form. It's also a philosophy. So when you break a piece of pottery, for example, here in the West we might throw it out, but they glue it together with gold. You may have seen it, the gold sort of substance that keeps it together. And they create something beautiful. So rather than discarding things that are broken, they create something more beautiful. And that's really a metaphor for life, for our own lives, embracing our imperfections, and knowing that you're still valuable. Yes, you've been battered and bruised, you've had many traumas, but you're still valuable.